In this video, we will cover many of the settings to get you started with EPDR. This will start with our user audit logs and alerts, then per computer settings, network services, network settings, and wrap up with workstation and server settings. I'm going to start in the settings section of WatchGuard EPDR. On the left, we are currently within users. This is an audit log that can tell you who has been taking what actions in EPDR. Useful if settings are changing and you want to track what each administrator has been modifying. My alerts here, we can choose what types of events we want to receive email notifications for, any additional emails we want them to go to, and the language. This way we can have more proactive updates. My alerts are user specific, so each administrator in the account can choose which emails they want to receive. Before we get into what we can do with these settings, I need to explain how settings work in EPDR. Each category here controls different things like how the agent itself updates or how it protects the computer. Within each category, we can create multiple sets of settings for different purposes. Maybe your servers require a higher level of security than your workstations. You can create different settings for them here. The default settings are always included as well as a good starting point and reference for you. To assign settings to computers, I will start by opening the default per computer settings. Then I will select the recipients of these settings by clicking here. Now we can decide what groups or computers we want to use these settings. If I want to add a group, I can click on this little plus on the top right, then in this window select the group I want to add. I can also add specific devices here if I like as well. For example, maybe I want my server to use this setting, but I don't have a specific group for servers. I can select the server and click Add. Now the server's endpoint agent will update to these settings. We can also assign settings through the computers list, which we look at in the filters and groups video. How you assign settings in your account is up to you. Back to per computer settings, this is where we can start to customize how we want our computers to interact with the endpoint agent. You can add new settings on the top right or copy from an existing rule with this copy button. Give it a name. Then we have recipients, but I must fill out all the required fields before I can define them. So to start, under Preferences, we can decide if the system tray icon is visible. Updates is if we want the agent to be able to update itself automatically, and if so, when it should do so. It is important to note that when the agent updates, the computer may need to restart. You can define here if the restart is automatic or not, depending on if it is a server or workstation. Security against unauthorized protection tampering will either allow or remove the ability for users to disable or remove the agent. The first option is a good idea to leave on, otherwise users may try to uninstall the protection when software or websites are prevented. Being able to disable protection is a great option for when IT staff may need to troubleshoot something. Enabling the anti-tamper protection will prevent the service from being interrupted by the user or software, ensuring it is always active. Enabling these first three options will require a password to be entered. Once you have entered this password, these additional two-factor authentication settings become available. By default, this is enabled but can be turned off. Now, when prompted for the password, you will also need to enter a one-time password from an authenticator app like our Endpoint mobile app. Simply scan this QR code into your app of choice. Additionally, you can choose to have a shared token for your whole account or individual tokens for specific settings. Shadow Copies gives us the ability to interact with the built-in Windows Shadow Copies feature, where every 24 hours, it will take a backup of the device. Then, if you need to roll back, you can easily do so through the various Windows tools. We can also choose what's the maximum amount of storage space this will use. Default is 10%. I'll then save the setting. If I want to choose the recipients of this setting, I can reopen it and choose. Network Services is where we can assign special roles to an endpoint agent. The WatchGuard proxy role enables the agent to act as a proxy for other EPDR agents in the network when they need to communicate to WatchGuard Cloud. This is for computers in your network that are not allowed to send traffic to the internet, so they can still be fully protected. To add a proxy computer, simply click Add WatchGuard Proxy and select the agent you want to handle the task. No additional install needed. The endpoint agent handles the rest. The cache role is helpful to alleviate bandwidth usage. The endpoint agent already has bandwidth control on it, so most networks won't see any impact when the agent updates. In larger deployments though, 100 computers all updating at once could be a sudden spike of activity. A cache computer can help alleviate the public side of that update. It will download the information from WatchGuard first, then other endpoints can pull the update from that computer over the local network. To add a cache device, simply select the agent you want to take that role. This role will use additional disk space on that computer. And you are done. The endpoint handles it. A discovery computer is one that will scan the local network for unprotected devices. There are some additional settings to this option. First is if you want it to discover automatically. Then you have the scope. Discovery computers can only scan their own subnet even if you set this to entire network. So if you have multiple subnets, you'll want a discovery computer in each subnet you want scanned. If you limit it to only following IP addresses, then it will be further restricted. For example, if you have a larger /22 network and you want different discovery computers handling each of the /24 segments. If you also only care about domain computers, then a domain can be designated here and everything else will be ignored. The other option that we have is discovering computers in Active Directory. When this is enabled, we can add our Active Directory servers into this section. We can then add either an IP address or a name that will resolve to that server. The discovery computer will then attempt to make an encrypted LDAP bind to the Active Directory server. The username and password is optional because if left empty, the discovery computer will use its own machine user credentials. If you have a specific account that you'd like to be used instead, then that can be entered here. Then the recurrence is how often you would like to make this query. Network access enforcement ties in with WatchGuard fireboxes, where we can enforce that a client computer is only allowed to connect to the network if they have endpoint protections installed. We would enable it here and enter our account UUID into the field on this page, as well as on the firebox. Our documentation has further details on acquiring this UUID. As for the client side, there are a couple of requirements. The client must be running Windows 8.1 or higher, or macOS High Sierra 10.13 or higher. And their settings profile must have advanced protection in hardening or lock mode, or have antivirus enabled. Either or both of those settings need to be in place for the client to be considered secure so they can connect to the network. Network settings is where we can choose how the endpoint agents will interact with the network services we have added to the network. I'll copy from the default. I can give it a name, then choose my language, which changes the language of the alerts the users see on their computer. Now, proxy is where this can be quite a bit more interesting. Normally, each endpoint will call to the cloud directly, but if you have isolated networks, this may not function. For example, a point of sale machine may not need regular internet access for security purposes. Instead, you can send all endpoint connections to a proxy device that does have internet access. Here, you define what proxy computer the agent will use. You can either use an existing web proxy in your network or define WatchGuard proxies for the agents. Then we have the cache settings, where you can select the cache computer to use. Normally this will be automatically detected, but if you want to use specific cache computers, they can be designated here. I will now go ahead and save these settings and apply them to my computers as needed. Remember, if you have computers with different requirements, you can simply create a separate set of settings for them. Computer maintenance gives us access to two main settings. The main one that I want to talk about now is automatic deletion. When enabled, this allows the EPDR portal to remove devices from your computer's list based on a filter that you define. You can learn more about filters in the Filters and Groups video. As an example, I'm going to use a filter that I created called Disconnected for More Than a Month. This filter will include any devices that have not called home to the cloud for more than 30 days. It is important to note that this will not uninstall the agent or permanently remove the devices from your account. If the devices do call home to the cloud in the future, they will be added back into the account. We also do not delete any of the information pertaining to a deleted computer, so it can appear in future reports. This deletion process runs every day between 1 and 3 a.m. UTC. Workstations and servers is where we configure all of the security protections for the computer. I will only cover the general section here because entire videos will be needed for the other sections. Within General, we can first see our alerts. This is so the user will see a message when the antivirus and web access controls take action. Having a custom message here with contact details can be helpful and alleviate some users' frustrations when software or websites aren't loading for them. Updates are to keep the agent knowledge as current as possible, which includes the signature files for the antivirus engine. Having the background AV scan run whenever the knowledge updates can be a useful feature on some high-risk computers, but is usually not recommended due to resource usage. Uninstalling other security services is often to alleviate conflicts. Security products will often mark other security products as malicious because they are running thorough scans or manipulating files. By default, EPDR can try to uninstall those other products to prevent issues in the future. If you plan to deploy EPDR alongside other security solutions, make sure you consider this option. Exclusions are powerful but dangerous options. As this warning message says, you should use these sparingly, because any exclusions are completely ignored by all of the protections in EPDR. Typically, this should only be used for software that is conflicting with the endpoint agent. For example, if you are also using the WatchGuard threat detection and response service. We need to add an exclusion here, as well as the file path it is using. This will prevent the endpoint agent from acting against threat detection and response. Use exclusions carefully and be specific with your exclusions to avoid unintended consequences. Each one you add is a security hole in your computers where malicious content may try to hide. For our key takeaways, first remember, per computer settings control some basic functions like updates and limit tampering within the agent. For example, adding a password to uninstallation or disabling the agent. Network settings and services enable more complex needs like a proxy computer if agents don't have internet access, or a cache for larger networks. Workstations and servers can help with automatically removing other security services to prevent conflicts and improve performance, as well as add exclusions when needed.